Hey guys, how's it going? Brandon here, and today we're talking about bass behavior in the springtime or the pre-spawn, leading up to where they're going to spawn. In this video, we're going to cover kind of where those bass are in different months, different water temperatures, give you some idea of what baits would be best in those situations. But like I always say, there's no rules in fishing. These are simply guidelines that help you put more bass in the boat. So let's get into it. Okay, so what is spring bass fishing? Well, spring bass fishing is anything after the winter leading up to spawning conditions or even the spawn as well as in the spring. For the most part today, we're going to talk about more of the pre-spawn leading right up to the spawn, and we'll make the spawn a different video. So if you're looking for temperatures, at least here in Oklahoma, the pre-spawn is usually at 45 to 65 right before the spawn happens. So the early pre-spawn, that February to March time frame, the water's still pretty cold. A lot of people wouldn't consider it pre-spawn or springtime, but 45 degrees to 55 degrees, that water's warming up a little bit. It's a lot of that upper layer has started to warm up, and it's really triggering bass because of this length of day. The time starts to change, the days are getting longer, and that upper layer starts to warm. And basically, this is kind of going to be the first step to trigger bass to start the spawning phase. Early on in the pre-spawn, when that water's still cold, bass will stick around the bait. They'll be lower in the water column. And then as that upper layer warms, as I said, those bass are going to lift up in that upper water column. They may not move shallow, but they're definitely going to raise up in the water. As that water starts to get closer to that 55 degree, upper end of this early pre-spawn, some of those bass will just sit up higher and they'll rest in the water column or sun. Basically just, I think something with, something that triggers that bass, that sunshine helps the growth, it helps the eggs, in those bigger females to start to grow and kind of trigger that spawning, first spawning step. Okay, one of the good things we've seen with live scope is how these bass react in the winter. You get those sunny days, a few sunny days, they'll actually lift up higher in the water column to get that sun. Even if the shad and the bait are down low, they may just lift up and rest. And really when they're ready to feed, go down and eat. Just depending on the shad will also lift sometimes, but sometimes they won't, and the bass will be not related to them at all. So it's kind of something we never really thought existed before live scope, that fish would just be out there kind of floating and roaming. They would always be around structure in the shad, and that's just not the case. Okay, so some baits to try, there's tons of options. It just kind of depends on your style. If you're fishing from a boat or the bank, live scope or not live scope. This time of year, that bait or the bass are going to be around that bait though. But you do get that, like I said, they will slide up in the water column or even slide up to the bank if you get a nice warming trend, because they want to get that sunshine and kind of rest up, but they may go down deeper and feed and then come back up and rest, or feed up shallow. There's kind of a lot of things going on, but some baits to try if you have no wind, slick conditions. A jerk bait, it's still cold water. That bait moves slow. It emulates a dying bait fish. Best when there's no wind, it targets those fish higher up in the water column. A swim bait is just a good bait because you can control your depth. And then, of course, one of my favorites is the spinner bait, a single Colorado, throwing it up around structure, especially when you get that stained dirty water. Like I've said in some of my other videos, that stained dirty water forces bass to go shallow because they need to get around something. It's, again, the lights are out. They want to get around structure of some sort. And then, a crankbait, as you're going to see through a lot of this, a crankbait is always a good bait to throw really any time of year. You get some windy conditions, maybe the water's a little clearer, and it's not, doesn't play to a spinner bait. And basically with a crankbait, it creates reaction. So finding those mid-depth fish, those fish that kind of slid up, you want to throw a little deeper crankbait here, but those fish that have slid up and found some type of rock or structure or cover that you can kind of bang it off of and create that reaction strike. Okay, so mid pre-spawn, that March to early April time, that water's warming up a little bit more. The fish are getting more active, 56 to 60 degrees. And then at least for here in Oklahoma, this is a really good time to catch big fish. They're all really wanting to inch up and get in that shallower water. When you're more on the high end, that 60 degrees, less on the 56. The 56, they can kind of be everywhere. You can kind of catch them out deep, up shallow, just kind of depends on the day, the weather, all that kind of stuff that triggers that. But as this upper layer is continuing to warm, it's drawing that bait up shallower, higher in the water column, or even shallow to the bank. And those bass are getting more into their habits of spawning. They're moving into staging areas, and they begin to heavily feed up to get ready for that spawning time, because when they're spawning, they're not interested in eating. They're sitting, basically having babies or guarding babies, so they're just basically not eating as much as they will throughout the rest of the year. Okay, so what is a staging area? I like to think of it like a highway. These fish are going on a trip to the spawning grounds, and they're on this highway, the contour lines, and the rest stops, staging spots or gas stations, are the stopping points they're going to feed, rest, and then continue on their journey. So just like you stop at a gas station to get some beef jerky, they're gonna stop to feed up on these staging spots. So you get these warm days like we've had this year in the wintertime where it's kind of unseasonably warm. You get a stretch of 70 to 80 degree days. Well, that's gonna move those fish up. This brush pile here, that's gonna move those fish up a little bit shallow and stage where you can target those brush piles, laydowns, rocks, whatever it is. But just like in the spring, it happens all the time here in Oklahoma, you get a cold snap. It drops down into the 30s or something like that for a day, or 50s. And those fish, just because they're up there doesn't mean they have to stay there. They'll slide back to maybe that deeper brush pile and hang out there. And then when it warms up again, continue that journey back. So just because they're up there one day doesn't mean they're going to be there the next day. And that's the biggest thing in the spawn, in the pre-spawn time, is the fish aren't there in the same place they were even the day before. So you always kind of got to really adapt and find out where they're at in that journey. But once you can kind of dial in where they are on the lake or pond, typically you can match that all over the lake. Okay, so baits for this mid pre-spawn area, you can throw a number of things. Really just depends on conditions. In April, especially here in Oklahoma, we typically get a lot of rain, so our water is typically dirty. Depending on what lake you're on, how it kind of sets up, that's really going to indicate what baits you're going to throw. But a good one always to have on the boat is some type of jig, a flipping jig, or just a jig you can cast around cover, structure, wood. Especially when there's no wind, you kind of got that clear to dirty water. It's just a good bait to always have on the deck. Especially when you're in that warmer, that 60 degree water, that swim jig can come into play. We get a little bit of wind, maybe the water's a little clear. It allows you to put that natural presentation up and around the bank, the structure where they're kind of holding, where they're just kind of holding. And then again, a spinnerbait, you get a windy day, or maybe you have some stained or some dirty water. There's a lot of laydowns or just cover on the water that you want to hit, rock, wood. You can throw that spinnerbait around that kind of structure and get some really big bites this time of year. For a spinnerbait, it just really depends on water temp and water color. If you're dirtier the water or the colder the water, you're going to go to more of a Colorado blade, get more of that thump. If you clear the water, you need to move the bait a little faster because of that clear water. You want to go more to the willow leaf blades. Move that bait a little quicker. Just really depends on that condition there. Another good bait, a square bill crankbait this time of year, especially you get windy conditions. Maybe the water's a little clear, but it's stained. Not really setting up for a spinnerbait, or maybe the water's just a little bit warmer. That square bill just creates strikes. You can throw it, bang it off wood, rock. In some cases, you can actually pull it through some grass, depending how thick the grass is. It's just a really versatile bait, and creates that reaction strike. Okay, the late pre-spawn, we're getting really close to where they're just basically going to get on the beds here soon and start spawning. That's early to mid-April here in Oklahoma, 61 to 65 degrees. And this time of year, you know, they're really going to get shallow, but the bass are continuing to move shallow. They're feeding up real heavy here, and then eventually finding their spawning grounds. And as you get more into that spawn, they're going to start feeding a little bit less and less.
Okay, so when the bass are making their final push up to their their final spots, they get kind of locked on. You know, a cold front can pull them off, but a lot of times if they're on the bed, locked on, doing their thing, they'll stay there. But that kind of little transition point is when your baits are really going to change, because they go from more of a feeding mode to a defending mode. So you want to get more finessey with your baits. If they do get a cold front and they pull off, and that can be good again, because they may feed again before they make the push back. So your baits kind of stay that pre-spawn, more power, aggressive style spinner baits and stuff like that. But as they make that final push on and they get up there, keep in mind they're in that defending mode rather than the feeding mode.
Okay, so some baits to try for that late pre-spawn. You know, that 61 degree water, you know, it doesn't seem like much, but that 60 degree water, 61, is a lot different from that 65 degree, just depending on where you're at. It can really change a lot, especially if you get a warming trend, full moon, something that's drawing those fish even shallower, triggering them to want to start to spawn. But a good bait this time of year is always a Texas rig, just a kind of a flipping bait. You can flip it up around cover, in grass, or just kind of do everything with it because it's not going to get hung up. You can throw that when there's no wind. It's more of a natural presentation. A good bait, especially on that warmer end of this, is a wacky rig. For whatever reason, I know it looks dumb, doesn't make any sense, but it catches bass. And you get a day where there's no wind, you get some clear water, you can just kind of pitch it up around cover close to the bank and let it fall, especially if they're really getting close to that bedding. This bait kind of also goes into the spawn. You can throw this bait when they're spawning, before they're spawning. It's just a good bait to get bites this time of year. A swim jig. This bait is just good. You get a little bit of wind. Maybe the water's a little stained. You can't quite see up there very well, but it's clear enough where you can they can see it. It just imitates a bluegill, and bass around the spawn hate bluegill. They ate their babies. So that's just a really good bait that time of year, and it doesn't get hung up. It's fairly weedless, and you can swim it around grass, wood, rock, pretty much anything. So in the bladed jig, it's really close to what like a swim jig. It's just if you get a little more wind, you have a little bit more stain on the water. Maybe even the water's just a little bit colder. It's not quite at that 65. The bladed jig is going to play a little bit better in this situation. You can, again, throw it around a lot of things. It's good through grass. It's good around structure. You can kind of move it around. It's not as weedless as a swim jig, obviously, but when you get that wind and clear water, it just creates those reaction strikes. But again, you can throw it. There's several other baits I could put here. These are just some type of ideas to kind of clue you in on what to throw in certain times in certain conditions.
All right, guys, like I always say, there's no rules in fishing. These are just guidelines to follow. My biggest tip would be start in the mouth of the creek and then work your way back to the back of the creek and find out where they are in that journey. Is going to help you put more bass in the boat, because that's always the goal here, to help you catch more fish. If you haven't already, check out some of my other videos I have, and thanks for watching.